Welcome back to the Midnight Mind, where we study the truth while the world sleeps. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. And while you're at it, hit that like button for me, I really would appreciate it. It's almost midnight. It's time to enter the minds of Schopenhauer and Machiavelli. Have you ever walked away from a conversation believing a choice was entirely yours, only to realize hours later that the idea had been planted in your mind long before you voiced it? This moment is unsettling because it exposes a quiet truth. Persuasion rarely feels like persuasion. It feels like recognition, as if the conclusion rose from within you. Today we step into the shadowed territory where influence becomes almost invisible, guided by Machiavelli's strategic precision and Schopenhauer's mastery of psychological redirection. Schopenhauer once wrote, "The truth is not always the stronger side in an argument," a line that cuts deeper than most people realize. It suggests that victory in persuasion belongs not to the person with the most accurate facts, but to the one who understands the hidden currents of human desire, ego, and fear. Machiavelli understood this instinctively. People follow what feels correct long before they follow what is correct. When you master this principle, you stop pushing ideas and start shaping the emotional landscape where those ideas take root. The art of dark persuasion begins with a simple psychological shift. Instead of confronting someone's beliefs, you guide the frame that determines how those beliefs operate. Most people argue at the surface level, words, claims, counterclaims. But Machiavelli would advise you to influence the stakes and assumptions beneath the discussion. When you subtly define the problem, the other person begins solving it on your terms. They feel autonomous, yet their options have already been narrowed. This is the power of reframing. You alter the battlefield so the other person walks toward the conclusion you designed. Reframing works because the human mind defends its commitments more intensely than it defends its conclusions. Once someone anchors their identity to a viewpoint, they will protect it even when it harms them. So instead of pressing against their beliefs, you shift the meaning surrounding those beliefs. You don't challenge their ego, you redirect its momentum. Schopenhauer understood this as well. People don't debate to discover truth, but to preserve pride. By validating their sense of intelligence or independence first, you create the psychological safety that allows them to drift toward your perspective without resistance. Another powerful method is seeding the idea so subtly that the audience adopts it as their own. Machiavelli often accomplished this indirectly, using advisors or events, so the prince concluded what Machiavelli wanted without feeling manipulated. In modern conversations, this can be done by offering incomplete thoughts, asking guiding questions, or placing attention on the consequences rather than claiming ownership of any solution. When the person articulates the conclusion, it becomes almost unquestionable. They believe they reached it through their own reasoning, which gives the persuasion a self-sustaining quality. One of the most elegant tools for navigating objections is the feel, felt, found technique, which reflects Schopenhauer's insights that people resist arguments when they feel invalidated. You begin by acknowledging their emotional position, then align them with others who shared the view, and finally offer a gentle pathway towards your conclusion. This method bypasses defensive pride and replaces confrontation with continuity, allowing change to appear as evolution rather than surrender. Here's an example of the feel, felt, found persuasion technique. In this scenario, we are encouraging someone to consider India as a vacation destination. Suppose the other person says, "Oh, I could never go to India, it's so overcrowded." You would begin with, "I know how you feel," establishing emotional recognition and showing that you understand their concern. Then you continue with, "I felt the same way," creating a shared viewpoint. Finally, you introduce a new perspective by saying, "But what I found was that India has breathtaking countryside and wide open spaces, and even in the cities, the people are so warm and welcoming that the crowds fade into the background." Another person might object by saying, "I could never go to India, the flight is so long." Again, you would start with, "I know how you feel," acknowledging their discomfort. You follow with, "I felt the same way," reinforcing that their hesitation is familiar and understandable. Then you shift toward the positive discovery. But what I found was that international flights are far more comfortable than I expected. There's plenty of legroom, the entertainment options are excellent, and it actually becomes a perfect opportunity for some much-needed me time. By the time I landed, I felt surprisingly refreshed. But persuasion becomes truly potent when you master the art of shifting from argument to narrative. Humans don't think in arguments. They think in stories that protect their identity and justify their choices. Machiavelli understood that controlling the narrative surrounding a decision mattered more than controlling the facts. Frame your idea as the natural next chapter in the other person's existing story, and resistance dissolves. They aren't abandoning their past beliefs, they are moving forward in alignment with the self-image they want to maintain. In this way, persuasion becomes a bridge rather than a battle. Another principle from the art of controversy is the strategic use of prioritization. Instead of disproving the other person's statement directly, you shift attention toward a detail that reorients the argument. People are easily led by what is made salient. If you highlight a new angle, a new risk, or a new benefit, the entire discussion reorganizes around that focal point. This is not deception, it's influence through selective emphasis. You're not altering the facts, you are altering the hierarchy of importance. The human mind always follows what feels most urgent or most rewarding. Dark persuasion becomes dangerous only when used to dominate rather than illuminate. The purpose here is awareness, not exploitation. When you understand these mechanisms, you not only guide conversations more effectively, you also become harder to manipulate yourself. You recognize when someone reframes your narrative, shifts attention to steer your decisions, or uses emotional continuity to bypass your skepticism. Machiavelli teaches strategy, but Schopenhauer teaches defense. Together, they reveal a deeper truth. Influence is a two-way mirror, and mastery requires seeing your own susceptibility as clear as you see others. As you begin to observe these patterns in everyday interactions, something unexpected happens. Conversations slow down. You start noticing why certain comments draw you in, why certain objections dissolve, why certain people persuade effortlessly while others push endlessly with no effect. You become aware that influence is never about louder arguments. It's about shaping the mental terrain where decisions take form. And once you understand this terrain, you see the invisible architecture beneath every conversation. That architecture is persuasion, quiet, psychological, and always operating beneath whatever words are spoken. There comes a moment when you realize persuasion is not merely something you use on others, it's something you practice on yourself every day without noticing. Every decision you make involves internal framing, emotional justification, and narrative construction. The very tools Machiavelli and Schopenhauer describe also rule your inner world. That's why mastering dark persuasion leads to something larger than influence. It leads to clarity. You begin to see the hidden pressures shaping your desires, your excuses, and your fears. And once you recognize them, you reclaim the authority you often give away unconsciously. Schopenhauer remarked, "A man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." A statement that reveals the heart of psychological persuasion. You act by choice, yet the origins of those choices, the desires, the impulses, the rationalizations, often lie beneath awareness. This understanding is crucial. To master persuasion ethically, you must first observe the forces that persuade you from within. When you see how emotion precedes rationality, how ego shapes preference, and how narrative colors truth, you gain an advantage that no technique alone can ever replace. This internal awareness becomes the foundation for external influence. The more clearly you understand your own triggers, the more effectively you can guide conversations without coercion. When someone resists your ideas, you avoid conflict because you see what's happening beneath their objections. pride seeking equilibrium, fear seeking safety, uncertainty seeking reassurance. Machiavelli would advise you to offer stability. Schopenhauer would advise you to bypass the ego's defenses. Both point toward the same principle. Influence works best when it reduces psychological friction rather than increasing it. One advanced technique for reducing resistance is pre-framing the emotional stakes before the idea appears. Fear of loss, desire for certainty, and the need for autonomy drive most decisions. Instead of presenting an idea directly, you describe the emotional landscape that makes the idea feel inevitable. You shift the conversation toward challenges the other person already acknowledges. When the idea enters afterwards, it feels like an answer rather than an argument. This method reflects Machiavelli's understanding that people follow the path that feels safest, and your role is to illuminate the path. Another technique is controlled ambiguity. Present a concept with just enough clarity to inspire direction, yet enough openness for the other person to fill in the details with their own preferences and assumptions. This strategy appears in The Prince, when Machiavelli discusses the importance of reputation. The image matters more than the specifics. In conversation, ambiguity invites cooperation. It makes the other person contribute their imagination to your idea, which creates ownership. Once they invest meaning into it, persuasion becomes effortless because they are now defending their interpretation, not your proposal. Schopenhauer's approach, however, focuses on something more subtle: the redirection of energy. Instead of opposing someone's statement head-on, you divert the momentum of their argument toward a conclusion that aligns with your position. If they value efficiency, you guide the discussion toward how your idea achieves it better. If they value harmony, you emphasize the rational benefits. You don't contradict their foundation, you build on it. This is the essence of psychological aikido. No force is wasted. Their own reasoning carries them to the destination you prepared, and the journey feels natural rather than imposed. Yet the most powerful form of persuasion is not reframing, redirection, or emotional sequencing. It is moral positioning. People crave alignment between their choices and their self-image. They want to feel wise, capable, loyal, principled, or independent. When your idea supports that identity, persuasion becomes irresistible. Machiavelli recognized this deeply. Rulers must appear virtuous, even when acting strategically, because the appearance satisfies the public mind far more than the reality. Apply this internally to your conversations. Link your idea to the virtues the other person already claims, and the idea becomes an expression of who they believe they are. This is why some of the most effective persuaders rarely present solutions. They present identities. They don't say, "do this." They say, "people like you naturally move in this direction." It's not manipulation, it's recognition. You're appealing to the self the other person already strives toward. Once you understand this, arguments become obsolete. You're not competing for correctness, you're aligning with aspiration. Schopenhauer would argue that reason alone never moves people, identity does. Machiavelli would remind you that identity determines loyalty, and loyalty determines power. But persuasion without self-mastery is dangerous. It becomes a performance rather than a discipline. To use these principles responsibly, you must understand the line between influence and coercion. Influence leaves the other person empowered. Coercion leaves them diminished. Influence respects autonomy. Coercion exploits vulnerability. When you persuade ethically, your goal is clarity, mutual benefit, and shared understanding. These techniques become tools for reducing friction, illuminating options, and guiding conversations with intelligence and intention, not weapons for domination. Without restraint, dark persuasion becomes corruption. With restraint, it becomes leadership. In the end, the real challenge is not persuading others, it is resisting the forces that seek to persuade you without your awareness. Advertising, politics, social expectations, group identity, and even your own fears constantly shape your decisions. When you recognize the techniques used on you, you reclaim your agency. You stop reacting and start choosing. And that is the final lesson of Machiavelli and Schopenhauer combined. Power begins in the mind, long before it reaches the world. Persuasion surrounds you, whispers to you, and pushes you. But the moment you see it clearly, the spell breaks. So as you move through your daily interactions, pay attention to the subtle cues, the shifts in framing, the emotional pivots, the narrative invitations. Notice when someone guides your attention, shapes your interpretation, or appeals to your identity. These moments are not threats if you recognize them. They are opportunities. They allow you to practice awareness, adjust the frame, and maintain your inner autonomy. Influence will always exist, but awareness turns influence into choice. And the person who chooses consciously is the person who cannot be quietly controlled. Because in the end, persuasion is not a contest, it's a mirror. It reflects the desires people hide, the fears they deny, and the identities they cling to. When you understand how these forces shape a conversation, you navigate human psychology with precision and compassion. You no longer push, you guide. You no longer argue, you illuminate. And you no longer struggle for control, you create alignment. This is the art Machiavelli hinted at and Schopenhauer exposed. The art of influencing minds without breaking them, of guiding decisions without taking freedom away. The more you practice, the more you'll notice a shift within yourself. You start speaking with intention instead of habit. You frame ideas with calm clarity rather than force. You anticipate objections without fear because you no longer view conversation as conflict. Instead, it becomes a strategic dance of perception, emotion, and meaning. When you reach this point, persuasion becomes effortless, not because you overpower others, but because you align with the currents already moving within them. Dark persuasion reveals itself as psychological understanding refined into skill. And here's the final insight. Every conversation leaves a trace. A shift in perception, a seed planted. The person you influence today will think differently tomorrow, not because you imposed your will, but because you opened a doorway in their thinking. That doorway may lead to growth, to clarity, or to change they didn't know they were ready for. When persuasion is used with integrity, it becomes a gift, one that empowers rather than constrains. The best persuaders don't manipulate reality, they unveil it. So remember this as you walk forward. Persuasion is everywhere. It shapes your choices, your relationships, your opportunities, and your future. You can allow it to control you, or you can learn to master it. Machiavelli teaches the strategy. Schopenhauer exposes the psychology. But the real mastery comes from you. Your awareness, your restraint, your intention. Influence with clarity. Guide with respect. And recognize that the greatest power is not domination, but direction. The herd will always follow the strongest frame, the clearest voice, the boldest narrative. But you are not the herd. You are the one who chooses the frame. Thanks for watching The Midnight Mind. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like, subscribe if you haven't already, and share your thoughts down below. I always love reading the comments, and I appreciate everyone who takes the time. See you next time.